Let's talk about a nation at war. Its very survival is on the line, and the whole thing comes down to the two men in charge of the armies. This is a story about strategy, about betrayal, and about the massive, unbridgeable gap between a leader who fights for freedom and one who just wants absolute power.
So, what really makes a leader when everything is falling apart? Is it just having the bigger army, raw power, or is it something else? Is it about how clever you are, or is it about your character? That's what we're going to get into today by looking at one of the most incredible leadership showdowns you'll ever find.
All right, so let's meet our two main players. The whole story revolves around two groups, the Nephites and the Lamanites. On one side, you have Captain Moroni, the guy leading the Nephite armies. He's the defender, a total genius when it comes to strategy, and he's all about protecting his people's freedom. And on the other side, we have Amalickiah. He's actually a Nephite who's so hungry for power that he's willing to lie, betray, and even kill to get to the top. The clash between these two is going to decide everything.
So let's start with our hero, Captain Moroni. His story is just incredible, not just for what he did, but for how old he was when he did it.
He was only 25 years old. I mean, just think about that. At an age where most of us are just figuring out our lives, this guy was handed the job of saving his entire nation from being wiped off the map. And here's the thing. He wasn't just a commander. He was the chief commander. The entire weight of the war effort was on the shoulders of a 25-year-old facing a threat that could destroy his whole civilization. No pressure, right? And this quote? This gets right to the heart of who Moroni was. At one point, he was facing some serious dissent from his own people. And what did he do? He didn't just bark orders. No, he tore his own coat, wrote these words on it, and raised it on a pole. He called it the title of liberty. It became this powerful symbol that rallied everyone to the cause. But Moroni knew passion wasn't enough to win a war. The guy was a brilliant innovator. He completely reimagined the Nephite military. He brought in better armor, things like breastplates and shields. He built up these amazing fortifications, turning weak cities into places the enemy couldn't touch. And his tactics, he was a master of using spies, decoys, and ambushes to completely outsmart enemies who had way more soldiers than he did. Okay, now let's flip the coin and look at our bad guy. While Moroni was building defenses to protect his people, Amalickiah was building his own empire on nothing but lies and bloodshed. His rise to power is frankly a masterclass in treachery.
Just look at his playbook. First, he tricks a rival general, a guy named Lamanite, into a meeting. Then he betrays him and takes over his army. Step 3, he has Lamanite secretly poisoned so he can take his spot. Then he has his own guys murder the Lamanite king and pins the whole thing on the king's guards. And for the final move, he marries the widowed queen to solidify his power. It's a brutal step-by-step guide to becoming a tyrant. So, with Amalickiah now the king of the Lamanites, the stage is set for the big showdown. And this isn't just two armies clashing. It's two completely opposite ways of thinking about war going head-to-head.
Amalickiah's strategy was all about brute force. His big idea was just to gather this gigantic army, this numerous host, and just steamroll the Nephites. He figured he could crush them with sheer numbers. A simple plan, but a deadly one. But Amalickiah and his armies were in for a rude awakening. They'd march up to a city they thought would be an easy win, only to find that Moroni had turned it into a fortress with these huge walls of earth and wood. They were stopped cold again and again, totally confused by these new defenses. But just as Moroni seemed to have the upper hand, a huge new problem popped up, this time from inside his own country. A group of wealthy Nephites who called themselves kingmen decided they wanted to get rid of their free government and install a king. And when the Lamanites invaded, these guys just refused to fight. They wouldn't defend their own country. And the result was absolutely devastating. Moroni had to pull his army away from the front lines to go deal with this rebellion. And while he was distracted, fighting his own people, Amalickiah's forces just poured into the country and captured a whole string of cities along the coast. That internal division just handed the tyrant his biggest victory of the war. So after putting down the rebellion, Moroni gets back to the war, but he's lost a ton of ground. To win it back without having to fight a bunch of bloody battles, he was going to have to rely on his #1 asset, stratagem. In his plan to retake the city of Mulek, it was pure genius. First, he sends a small group of soldiers to act as a decoy, luring the main Lamanite army out of the city.
As the Lamanites chase them, Moroni's hidden army swoops in and takes the now empty city. The Lamanites, realizing they've been tricked, turn back, only to run smack into a third Nephite army that was waiting for them in an ambush.
It was a perfect trap. The Lamanites were caught, totally exhausted, between two fresh Nephite armies. They were surrounded. Moroni's strategy completely took apart a much bigger army, and he did it with very few casualties on his own side. The war dragged on for years, a brutal, bloody reminder of what it costs to stay free. And in the end, it would claim the lives of both of its main architects, but in very, very different ways. So how does it all end? The tyrant Amalickiah is killed in his sleep. A daring Nephite warrior named Tankum snuck into his tent and assassinated him. His brother Ammoron takes over and keeps the war going for years, until he meets the exact same fate, also at the hands of Tankum. But in that final confrontation, the hero Tankum is also killed, paying the ultimate price to finally bring peace.
And Moroni, after all those years of constant war, he had finally done it. He'd kicked out the invaders, he'd crushed the threats to his people's freedom from within, and he'd secured the nation. And with his job done, he just voluntarily gave up all his power and retired to live out the rest of his life in peace. This quote from one of Moroni's letters really says it all. This was never a guy who loved war or wanted power for himself. Everything he did, every single battle, was for something bigger: his country, his people, his God.
And that brings us right back to our big question, but with a new spin. When you look at this whole story, the tyrant Amalickiah's biggest wins only happened when the good guys were fighting each other. So it leaves us with a question that's as relevant today as it was then. What's the bigger threat to our freedom? The enemy at the gates, or the division we have within?